Wow, thank you so much for coming. It's been a wonderful year, hasn't it? There's something really special about this year. I've really appreciated it very much. It's one of the few conferences in the whole world that's not run by Xi Jinping, apparently. So if it's okay, I would like to talk to you about a difficult subject, and one about which I think many people are very, I would say, naive. I certainly was until fairly recently. So I thought I would share with you what I've learned, and maybe it's a foreshadowing of a book I'm working on right now. So every book I write, I think, is more important than the last one, and the most recent one is the most important at all. But each one gets ever more boring, you know. The book that everybody loves is Bourbon for Breakfast, right? That's my stupidest book. It was like that. We liked you back then. Now you're all serious, you know. So okay. Okay, let's start first by talking about presidents who were shot. Can anybody name a president who was what? Oh, okay. So we got JFK, right? Reagan was shot. Lincoln. Andrew Jackson was shot? I don't remember that. Hamilton. But he wasn't shot as president, right? He was Secretary of Treasury. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't shot, was he? Somebody shot him? Huh. Yeah. Those were the days. Feds, raise your hand. All right. Anybody in a suit? Oh, wait, no. Actually, can you name any presidential shooters? What? Hinckley. That was right. Oswald. Yeah, he didn't kill anybody. No, but he was a patsy, right? I don't know. Who? Ruby, yeah. There's John Wilkes Booth, right? And anybody else? It's amazing. Like, nobody's actually said, okay, here's the story. This is actually the most significant presidential shooting and assassination in American history. So strange what we know and what we don't know. On July 2nd, 1881, a guy named James Gutrow, an attorney from Illinois, rocked up to a Baltimore, Maryland train shop, heavily armed, and out popped of the train the president, who was Garfield. Who said that? You know about, yeah, but you know everything. Okay. Yes, James Garfield. He had only been in office for 4 months, and suddenly bought it in the torso. It's a pretty cruddy way to shoot somebody, I think. Shoot him in the lower back. I mean, that's not very brave. But shot him. And then, and later, the president died. Now, there's a whole history. I have not read this, but some people say that Garfield's doctors killed him. That they could have easily removed the bullet and he would have survived it, but the doctors, I don't know, bled him with leeches or something. I don't know what happened. So I believe, I haven't looked into that. Maybe he didn't need to die. But anyway, the point is he was dead 4 months into the presidency. Now, nobody remembers this because nobody remembers any of the presidents from that period of American history. We call them the postage stamp presidents, and the list of presidential greats, they're always like the last guys, right? It's because we mostly had peace and prosperity, and nobody really apparently wants that. We like presidents who destroy the country. That's how they become famous, apparently. So James Garfield, I like him, and nobody even knows his name now. Wouldn't it be nice to live in a country where we didn't have to know the name of the president at all? I remember I was in Costa Rica some years ago, and I said, "Wait, who's president around here?" And everybody said, "I don't know. Some guy, They don't even have a White House, The guy just they elect him president, stays living in his home, keeps his normal job or whatever, and then at some point he's not president anymore. Nobody cares, knows, they don't have a military, right? Oh, that's why they keep getting invaded. No, they've never been invaded. Yeah, okay. But anyway, so Garfield died. So the next president, Chester Arthur, who was, I guess, his vice president, succeeded him. You tell me, was he his vice president? Oh, okay, yeah. He succeeded him, and Chester Arthur said, listen, does anybody know what motivated this guy to kill the last president? I, sort of like to know because, yes. Well, apparently his motivation was that he had worked really hard for Garfield's election, and he was expecting to get a job, and he didn't get a job. And so he just said, I'm going to kill the guy, and that was it. So Arthur is thinking, well, is there anything that I can do to stop myself from being killed and maybe even help other presidents from being killed? And at that time, people presented to him a new bill. They said, pass this bill. It's a great bill. It's called the Pendleton Act. And it's great because it makes a large part of the federal workforce permanent. So that way, we limit the amount of jobs that can be hired and fired, and we get real professionals in here running this place. And we get rid of what they call the spoils system. So the spoils system, it's got a bad name. We used to call it representative government, by the way. It means that when you get to be president, you get to fire the old people and hire your own guys. Okay, is that corrupt? Sure. But government's inherently corrupt. Nobody knows how to run a good government. They're all corrupt, all right? But I would say just in the scheme of things, the spoils system is better than what replaced it. And what replaced it was the Pendleton Act of 1883 that created for the first time in American history a permanent civil service that exists outside of politics. That's for the first time. You cannot find this thing in the Constitution. Now, just by way of review, we generally think democracy, representative democracy, works the following way. We have rights as individuals, and as individuals we have some influence over public life and the laws under which we live. But of course we can't all vote unless you're living in New Hampshire, in which case you just run for office and you join the 4,000 members of the legislature. So we elect people to represent our interests. And do you like this lesson so far? It's a good lesson, right? And they go to the State House or the U.S. Capitol and carry our values to Washington and make the laws and kind of are responsible for public life. And if we don't like them, then we vote them out. That's the way it's supposed to work. And in the system, we have three branches of government. The legislature, the executive, the presidency, and the judiciary. Okay, how does this new thing of 1883 fit in to that structure? I would suggest to you that it does not. It doesn't fit in at all. It's nowhere in the Constitution. Permanent employees, forever, and it's inherently anti-democratic, because the voters have no control over it. The political class has no control over this thing at all. So it was wrong from the start, and it was all put in place as a kind of a measure to prevent the president from being killed. In other words, you know how it always is. The government's always solving the last crisis, and their solutions are always stupid. They never really work, and they always make everything worse. It's just like 9/11, right? And so now you can't carry a bottle of shampoo on an airplane, because we're trying to prevent people from blowing up buildings or something. It's all crazy. So that was also true in 1883. Okay, so what happened then? We got a number of landmark sort of events that happened. This basically, I think the Pendleton Act was the beginning of the cancer. It was really the beginning of the end of the American Republic. Some people want to trace it back to the Civil War. Okay. Other people say it was this. I think it's the Pendleton Act is the great evil. That's the thing that ultimately has to be repealed and destroyed, or we're never going to get our country back. And I'll explain why in a little bit. So let's bump forward in time. We had, of course, the Spanish-American War, and then we had the income tax, and that created its own federal bureaucracy. Then we had the creation of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Drug Administration was created. And all of these big emergencies kept adding to the federal civilian workforce, the people who are living outside the democratic system and basically running ever more of national life. And then, of course, we had, the Prohibition was a disaster because that created this, the FBI, and then ultimately the ATF and so on, and allowed the administrative state, that's what I'm calling this thing, the administrative state. It's basically the fourth branch of government and the most powerful one. In many ways, the only powerful one, I'm sorry to say. I mean, I guess my thesis here is that our politicians are marionettes, and we're all completely deluded. We elect them and we pretend they're to make a difference. They can't make a difference, and they don't make a difference. It's all just a kind of a circus. It's a fiction that we engage in as a nation because our real rulers are the administrative state. And it kept getting worse. So Prohibition was a disaster for the administrative state. Then, of course, came the New Deal, with endless creations of new agencies, none of which Congress could really oversee. And so the staffing just grew and grew and grew. Then, of course, we had World War II, endless amounts of rationing and speech controls. Did I mention World War I? Yeah, I didn't. That was a catastrophe for the administrative state. Of course, it created temporarily a totalitarian system in the United States with speech controls and, again, net rationing, war production, industrial targets, and all sorts of things. That entire bureaucracy lasted that war, dialed it back a little bit, but the bureaucracies always last. They always sustain themselves. And then, of course, World War II, and then the Great Society. Nixon made it much worse with all of his creations of new agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency and so on. So we developed, over the course of, ever since the Pendleton Act, this catastrophic beast among us that we hardly ever talk about and hardly ever think about or even mention. Because I don't know why. And I'll talk to you about a very recent attempt to try to contain it and what happened to the president who tried to do it. It's very interesting. Okay, now let's just march forward. Pendleton Act, 1939 comes, and it turned out that the head of the Works Power Administration, who was a communist actually, had been using his power as the head of the agency to recruit people to work for Roosevelt's re-election, and that's where we got the Hatch Act from. This is the thing that's supposed to restrain federal workers from being political and forbid them from direct political activity. Now, the idea was to somehow make them unpolitical, which is ridiculous, because guess which party the federal workforce tends to favor? That which protects their jobs and expands their power, right? In this case, it happens to be, well, both parties are guilty, but these days, they're mostly, anytime you find a preponderance of federal workers, it's going to be tend towards a blue state, of course. So they're loyal now to the party that loves big government the most, and that, these days, the Democrats. So the Hatch Act made no difference whatsoever. It's just one of those things you had to kind of comply with. 1946 came the Administrative Services Act. That is widely known as the Constitution of the federal civilian workforce. It was like a brand new constitution. It's a big, thick thing that basically what it did was it codified the New Deal into permanence. It was a big thing. Right after, as we approached the end of World War II, there was a big struggle over FDR's legacy. The Republicans obviously hated the guy's guts. He got 4 terms in office, just ridiculous. And the Republicans were very anxious to trash his history and repudiate it. And the Democrats were very anxious to codify it and institutionalize it as a permanent feature of American life. That's what the Administrative Services Act did. It made it a permanent feature of American life. Can you hand me that thing right down there? Thank you. I remember when I first went to work for Ron Paul when I was very young, and I walked into his office, and he had left office by then, and he took all of his congressional books with him. And they were sitting in my office. And there were about, I don't know, I'm just going to guess, like 250 volumes. And it was called the Federal Code. And I said, Dr. Paul, what is this? He said, oh, that is the thing, that is the government, like in all those books. That's all administrative law. Congress didn't vote on a single thing in any of those books, but it's the law of the land. Explain that to me. How does that happen? That's the reality. Probably by now it's up to 1,000 books or more. I don't know, the Federal Code. And the Federal Register comes out, what, every week, maybe? And it shows the new additions to the Federal Code. And again, not voted on by Congress. It's just new regulations, new interpretations. So the way this works is this. Let's discuss very quickly the very important case of Chevron versus the EPA in 1984. Now, this is a case where the Environmental Protection Agency was using a very, say, liberal understanding of what Congress was, of legislation from Congress. Congress passes legislation, creates the Environmental Protection Agency. It says the agency should do the following thing. The agency always goes beyond that. What was at issue in the Chevron case is whether or not the court should defer to the agency's interpretation of legislation, or if something should be struck down simply because it's not in the legislation. What the court said, Supreme Court, said the agency can interpret a law however it wants, provided it's adhering to, provided it doesn't go beyond what the law says it can't do. And the court should always defer to the agency's interpretation. So, for example, if Congress passes a law that says we need to keep the American people safe, all right, and the agency, a new agency comes along called the American Safety Agency, and that agency says, well, all Americans have to wear foam pants. It's the only way to keep you safe. All right, so that goes to court. Right now, the courts, if they defer to the Chevron understanding, will say, well, you know, you look at the legislation, it didn't say that the American Safety Administration can't mandate foam pants, so therefore you have to defer to the agency's interpretation. You see what's happening here? This is the creation of a despotic administrative dictatorship. That's what these agencies do. And that has been true since 1883, 1939, 1946, and the Chevron case institutionalized it. That happened in 1984, and nobody noticed it, but it's a disaster. And it's that Chevron deference case that accounts for why the CDC, over the last couple of years, was able to force our nice little shop up the street here to put plexiglass between you and the person serving you a soda, and force you to wear masks on planes, and force you to do all the rest of it. I mean, for that matter, close your churches, tell you can't sing, tell them how many people you can have in your house, whether you can drive to Connecticut across state borders without quarantining for 2 weeks, and so on and so on and so on. All the things that the CDC was telling you to do all came about because they believed that they had the power to do it, and that nobody could tell them they couldn't do it. And you know what's horrible about it? They were correct. Now, my view is that this is a major problem. and that we libertarians need to get wise to this and figure out a solution to it. A judge in Florida, you remember this case? It happened, I guess, 2 or 3 months ago. A judge, the case of the mask mandate on transportation came before the court. And a judge is appointed by Trump. Best thing that Trump did, by the way, is appoint very good judges, for the most part. So for that, he deserves some credit. This judge looked at the CDC, and they're saying, oh, everybody has to wear a mask on airplanes, and also you can't get on a city bus without a mask, and if you're on an Amtrak, the guy's screaming at you, put it over your mask over your nose, and you don't do it. You're doing something illegal. Okay. Well, the judge looked at us and said, how do you justify this? And the CDC said, oh, let's see our power, let's see about our power. Oh, yeah. We were created in 1944 with the Public Health Services Act. And if you read that act, it clearly says that the CDC can do things that are in the interest of promoting sanitation throughout the country. So the judge is like, wait, what do masks have to do with sanitation? CDC's, well, people spraying germs out of their mouth, it makes everything really dirty, so we had to kind of clean that up with masks, And the judge is like, okay, this is preposterous, and so you're wrong, and so this mask mandate is illegal. And that was a great moment in American history because suddenly we realized we were in the right and they were in the wrong, and all the people that had been screaming at us to put on a mask on, and the stewards coming, put on your mask, put it over here. They were doing the illegal thing. We were doing the legal thing. So this is a potentially huge issue. When you have a federal judge actually saying the federal government was this whole time doing illegal things that are not justified by the law. And those of us rebels, us dissidents, us super spreaders, we were correct all along. All right, let's imagine a world in which judges actually behave this way, and for God's sake, they should have been doing this from March 2020, from the very beginning, Yeah, thanks, right? That's what we have judges for, right? To be a final check against government power. They haven't been that way in a very long time. But this one brave judge, and of course she was assaulted, all over the country. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the MSNBC and CNN, smearing her. Oh, she's young and she's stupid and she's a Trumpy person with no experience. She's dumb as a chicken, and a national hate campaign against her. Well, I was really intrigued because I read her decision. It's actually a complete masterpiece. You should read it. And also for all those in this room, how great is this? To have a judge say the government was doing illegal things and the people who were resisting the government were doing the right thing. That was just fantastic. Okay, how did the CDC respond? I was just telling somebody about, thank you for this hard cider. So I'm trying to change my drinking habits, as we all do. And so somebody said, you got to stop drinking that wine. It's got too much sugar. I said, oh, okay, good. I'll switch to gin. And then they said, well, you can't just drink gin like that. That's just absolute poison. It's going to cause your organs to swell up. You'll become an alcoholic. And I said, well, the damage is done there. But so okay. So I gave up gin. So I recently started drinking beer, and now people say to me, are you out of your mind? Don't you know that every beer is like a loaf of bread? Carbs are horrible for you. So this is my new experiment here. Hard seltzer. We'll see. Some people say I should just give up alcohol. What? Okay, so I'm imagining myself in the offices of the Biden administration with Fauci and the rest of these people. And they're trying to figure out how to respond to this federal judge. What do we say? What do you think we should say? And somebody blurts out, well, they can't say that. They can't just tell the CDC that we're doing something wrong. And somebody else in the room says, yeah, good point. And then somebody else says, probably that Jen Psaki, well, why don't we just say that? And they're like, okay. So that's what the response was. The federal judiciary doesn't have any authority to tell the CDC what to do. My God, if you've got judges telling us that what we can and cannot do, you will undermine our authority. That's what they said. Their authority. Oh, so their authority. And so no legislature can check their authority? Public opinion doesn't matter? Judges have no jurisdiction over what federal agencies do? That's it? That's the end of the story? And if that applies to the CDC, that also applies to NIH. It also applies to the Department of Agriculture, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development. And how many other agencies? How many federal agencies are there combined that make up the administrative state of 2.9 million permanent employees? You want to take a guess? How many? 40? 240? 2,000. No, it's between 240 and 2,000. It's 432. I know, right? That's the government. Everything else is just a made-for-TV movie. I'm telling you, it's the truth. So the CDC said the quiet part out loud. We have totalitarian power. You can't touch us. And that was their appeal. All right. So they appealed. We are awaiting that decision now. If, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court defers to the Florida 5th District Federal Court and says her decision is right, do you understand the significance of that? What that would mean is that from now on, federal agencies can only do that which is explicitly allowed by the legislation that brought them into existence. That would be, and that's why they're panicked. That's why they're panicked. They're very worried. I'm telling you, this is the battle. This is the battle for America. This subject, it's everything. Oh, it's so important that I'm not sure anything else matters, okay? So we roll back Pendleton, or we roll back Chevron. If that happens, it's going to be a hell of a day in America, I tell you. We're going to see some incredible things to happen. I mean, the attack. You think the Supreme Court is being attacked now? If they defer to the federal court in Florida over the mask decision, wow, it's just begun, because that is the issue. This is the single most important issue. The government wants to be this immortal totalitarian force over America. They are, right now, they are. All 432 agencies exercise dictatorial, unchecked, totalitarian power over us and every industry, even to the point that they can violate the Bill of Rights, and they don't give a thing about it. They will shut your churches. They will tell you how many people you can have a dinner party in your house. They can restrict, they don't care about the Bill of Rights. They don't care about anything. They don't care about representative government or freedom. Freedom, they spell it, like D-U-M-B, right? That's what they think our freedom is, just chaos and dangerous. They hate us. They hate freedom. And right now, they've gotten away the last 2.5 years. Tells you the truth about this country. We are no longer a representative democracy under a constitution. I'm telling you, my friends, it's long gone. And it seeped away slowly over the course of. There is a chance to get it back, and we can begin with the deference to that. Now, isn't it just tragic that that freedom would hang in such a balance, that we have to wait for the Supreme Court to defer to a Florida district judge who just happened to make the right case on a mask mandate, and then that begins the process of unraveling the administrative state? Isn't that incredible? What a tragedy. This country was born with the idea of individual rights and freedoms. That's what the whole ethos of America. It no longer is part of the state. It's part of you. It's part of me. It's how we want to live. It's how most people in this country want to live. They don't know. Most people did not know until 2.5 years ago that they could restrict your right to sing in a choir, close your church, close your schools, close your playgrounds for your kids. force shots on people, and tell people that that they're going to lose their job unless you take this injection, from this technology. Wait, what is it? Well, it's called mRNA. I've never heard of that. Well, it's because it's brand new. I'm a little suspicious of this thing. Isn't it gene therapy? Don't say it's gene therapy. But Mark Zuckerberg says it's gene. No, he was wrong about that, Yeah, they want to inject anybody who gets their baby vaccinated. I don't know what to say about that person. Wow, pathetic, huh? Anyway, it's outrageous. But anyway, my point is the reason this happened to us is the administrative state. That's the reason. They flashed their power for us to remind us who they are and who's really in charge. Okay. Let's talk about how it works. All right, so we got nearly 3 million people in this permanent bureaucracy. They can't be fired. The turnover in these jobs, it's like, I was looking it up the other day, it's like 0.05%, They just permanent lifetime jobs, G1, 2, 3, all the way up to 15 or whatever, and if you get to the top ranks, plus you get royalties from Pfizer, you can be like Fauci and make $500,000 a year, and it's a scandal. You ask him about it, he says, I don't know anything about that. So these 2.9 million employees who constitute the administrative state are ruled over ostensibly by what they call political appointees. Okay, so you get to be president, and your first job, you didn't know this, but they come to you, Mr. President, now it's time to appoint 4,000 people to fulfill these positions. Now, if you're Trump, he's like, yeah, I don't know 4,000 people that I would trust with power at all, actually. I've got this friend, that friend. So he filled these offices very slowly, right? He should have filled them very quickly, actually, because if you don't fill them, the permanent government employee stands in as the interim head of Department of Agriculture, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and everything else, right? So you have to appoint these people eventually, 4,000 of them. So, but what's funny about being a political appointee in a federal agency is it's just largely cosmetic. And it's a fun little game the bureaucracy plays with you. Because they always give you an office, they give you a parking spot right at the front of the building. They're like, oh, come on in, Madam Secretary, this is your new parking spot, it's reserved for you. Well, it must be very powerful, important. Oh, you certainly are, no question about it. No question about it. You are now the head of this 200,000 employees in this brutalist architecture building, called Housing and Urban Development. What does it do? Does anybody really know? Don't worry about that. You'll get the hang of it. Welcome to your new office. I mean, it's as big as this campground. It's got a fireplace, cart of liquor, You can even hire your own employees, so you call up your old high school buddies and college frat friends or whatever and give them all jobs. And you hang around, it's like, okay, what are we going to do now? Well, I don't really know. Well, how do we find out what this place does? Well, I don't know. There's some people who've been here a long time. I mean, some people have been here like 40 years. Why don't we ask them? Okay, that's the permanent people. They're the people who really run the agency. Your position is entirely cosmetic, and they hate you, if they think about you at all, actually. Federal workforce considers politics to be an irrelevant game. They pay almost no attention to it. I learned this back when I lived in Alexandria, Virginia, and I lived next to a high-level guy at the Department of Transportation, Department of Labor, and another guy who worked at the Pentagon. And I thought, oh, great, I've got neighbors interested in politics. I'd try to talk to them about it. They, I don't know anything about that subject. Well, what do you think of this race? I don't know, paying attention to that. They barely even knew who the president was. So they didn't even care because they know that they're the permanent. They know that this is all just cosmetic game playing. They're not going to pay any attention to it at all. Now, if, as a Secretary of Urban Development, Housing, Treasury, Department of Interior, whatever it is, the Transportation, whatever thing, if you want to be Department of Education, right? Remember what happened to Betsy DeVos? She made the huge mistake of trying to make change. And if you do that, they will kill you. I mean, slaughter you, destroy your reputation. She tried to make very small changes, like, I don't know, she was interested in seeing some decentralization and demonopolization of the educational system with, various efforts towards school choice and these sorts of things, and charter schools, right? And so immediately, New York Times, who appointed this unqualified, stupid bitch to be, this is the way it went, right? And so suddenly she's assaulted. It's the same thing that happened to James Watts, which was another guy, Secretary of Interior, who decided he wanted to sell federal lands, or give them back to the states. Suddenly, they kill him. And how do they do this? Well, they smear you as stupid and unqualified. New York Times is immediately leaking all comments from the career bureaucrats about your comings and goings. Oh, she was late to work. Well, she took a 2-hour lunch. And then they start looking through your expense accounts. Why did you order that bottle of wine last night? And exactly who paid for that, So they start to hector you and smear you and denounce you to put you on notice. You can't do this. And eventually, if you're threatening enough, you will be ridden out of town because it's exhausting. You don't want to wake up every day and see the headlines of the Washington Post telling you how stupid you are and going through your expense accounts and denouncing you for taking a trip somewhere that you weren't supposed to take or whatever the thing is. And you can find a scandal on anybody. That's an axiom in Washington. You can kill anybody at a reputation and vex them. So eventually they get tired of it. They came out of the private sector, fairly successful people usually, and they go back because they're tired of it. And then the bureaucrats cheer. That's the way it works. Can anybody name, I was playing this game with somebody, a friend of mine, can you name a single successful, what we consider a successful head of any agency in your lifetime? Somebody who's universally considered to be a great person in one of these agencies. I can't think of anybody. Who's that? Jet Pie? Jet Pie? What is he? Yeah, he was great, wasn't he? Yeah. He was actually pro-crypto, right? Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so what happens, right? How come they didn't slaughter him? Oh, they did slaughter him. Okay. At one point, I was doing some housing research. I was in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I don't know why I was hanging around doing that. But anyway, going through files, and I guess everybody just thought I was just a career bureaucrat. They didn't pay any attention to me. And one day I was working in an office, and I heard a bunch of crashing outside the door and down the hallway. And I poked my head out, and some guy was walking along and with his hands throwing pictures on the ground. He would just like pick it up, let it crash to the ground, all the glass breaks. He'd do the next one, do the same thing. He went all the way down the hallway. So the whole hallway was filled with glass. And then right behind him, a guy comes in with a long dust mop, a kind of a broom thing, and pushing along to sweep up all the stuff, put it in a pan, and put it in the trash. And then a third guy comes along behind him and starts hanging new pictures on the wall. And I said, wait, what just happened? Oh, that was the old Secretary of HUD. He's gone. Now we got a new one. So this goes on all the time. They pay no attention to it whatsoever. They probably heard the sound of glass breaking. They're, well, I guess that guy in the first floor office, there's a new inhabitant of that. So they pay no attention to these people whatsoever. So that's the role of political appointees in this country. They're just laughable. Now, they bring along with them their own staff. And let's say they hire 25, 30, 50 people who march around as fancy people. They go to the Cosmo Club. Oh, I'm the Deputy Assistant to the Assistant Secretary for the Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs. Oh, well, that's impressive. Well, okay, so the Secretary of whatever gets fired. His assistants don't get fired. They're all still there. So what's their job? Their job is to convert their political appointed positions into a permanent part of the civilian service, right? I mean, because mostly they suck. I mean, it's either that or go home and work for your father's refrigerator sales company or something like that in Illinois. So they'd rather stay in Washington being fancy pants. So they do what's called a burrowing in. You've heard about this, Gene? You sort of burrow in, to your job. You leave the political appointee, become part, and so then you become part of the problem. That's what happens at the end of every administration. There's a vast scramble on the part of thousands of people to convert their jobs into this permanent civilian service. So that's the reality of what goes on in this country. And I submit to you that we will never get this country back and restore freedom the way it should be unless we utterly smash this thing called the administrative state. Now, is it a popular political issue? Trump made it one. When his slogan, "Drain the swamp," that's what it was. People like to hear that. They're like, yeah, there's a swamp. Well, Trump had no idea what he was about to face when he got to Washington. He gradually came to realize that he wasn't in charge. And you recall these days, he got elected president, and almost immediately he was informed that he wasn't in charge. He's like, what the hell? I mean, he's a CEO guy, right? He thinks when you're a CEO, you're responsible for everything that goes on. He thought he was responsible for the executive agencies. Well, aren't I in charge of this NIH and the CDC and the Department of Treasury and the Department of Homeland Security and all the Department of Interior and all these other 400? Well, you are. Well, can I fire people? Nope, you can't do that. Well, can I rearrange things? Nah. Can't really do that. Well, can I rewrite these regulations? For example, I can't even get a good shower because the shower heads suck around this place. So why don't we rewrite these regulations that are entirely administrative law? Can't do that, Mr. President. Well, he got a little bit fed up with it. He got really fed up with it. Now, this is a fascinating history, and I bet you that nobody in this room knows about this. I'm going to be writing about this next week. So he figured this out, that we have a huge problem in this country, that there's the fake government, the one we elect, and there's the real government, which is the administrative state. So he's like, okay, we got to take this on. So, in May of 2018, he issued 3 executive orders, all designed to give the political appointees more rights to fire the civilian federal workforce. In other words, a little bit of an attack on the deep state. Some way to go after them so they're somehow accountable a little bit. 3 executive orders. That was in May of 2018. So he would have been in office, a year and a few months when he realized that this is a real core problem. And he wanted to fulfill his election promises. I mean, I was a never Trumper and all that kind of stuff, but I read about this kind of stuff. I sort of respect him in a way for what he tried to do. That was in May of 2018. So get this. Those 3 executive orders were immediately reversed by a D.C. district court. You know who presided over that court? Judge Brown Jackson. You know who that is? She's going to be on the Supreme Court soon. The Democrats picked her to be on the Supreme Court. It was a reward. A reward. A reward for her decision in that case, striking down these 3 executive orders that started to nibble away, chip away a little bit at the administrative state. You see how important this is? This is the issue. Trump figured it out. He started attacking it because you see that if the civilian federal bureaucracy goes and is suddenly subject to some sort of political, juridical oversight, the entire state as we know it is gone. And then we get back to the Constitution. That's how important it is. It's more important than anything else. So Trump figured this out. This judge reversed the order, and then her decision was later reversed itself on jurisdictional grounds. It was in the wrong court, the wrong filings, the wrong whatever. Oh, it's something to do with, I don't know, some labor dispute or something like that. But it got tangled up in bureaucracy, but Trump's executive orders never went through. But now the battle is on. If they wanted to get rid of Trump before, now they had to. You see, this is an existential threat. I mean, let's try to understand something about this, all right? So in the history of governments, there's several kinds of states out there. One is just a pure personal dictatorship. So when you kill the king, the state dies with it, all right? That went away a long time ago. And gradually, during the Enlightenment, we came to believe in these things called representative democracies, in which the people are in charge of the government. And that's kind of the system that the Constitution is. You know, we have rights, and among those are political rights, and that gives us some voice. There's a third kind of thing called the administrative state, which is immortal. You can't kill it. It just keeps living on. Even if the king's dead, there's a new president, the voters disagree, the damn administrative state lasts forever. It was invented by Louis XIV, basically. And it's gotten worse. That was not supposed to be the system we had in this country. That is the system we have in this country, and that is what they're going to defend to the last breath. So that's the real underlying battle in America. And I'm convinced that from May 2018, certain people said, this guy has got to go. One way or another. We cannot let this happen. So get this. God. All right, we've got to get Trump. Got to get rid of Trump. How are we going to get rid of Trump? Well, we tried to claim that he was Russia manipulated election. That didn't fly very well. Did you ever read any of those stories about Russia involvement? Did you ever read those stories? I was, because I didn't rule it out. I was never a Trump fan, but I would pick up the New York Times and there'd be some big headline about, more proof that Russia manipulated election outcomes and that Trump's really a tool of Putin. And it was, one of those New York Times articles. They had like 75 journalists on this, and you read like a 15,000-word article, and you get to the end of it, and you go, that all sounds kind of fishy. Wait a minute, do they have any actual evidence? Now that I think about it, no. There wasn't a shred of evidence. There wasn't anything that anybody could ever find showing Russian interference, at the behest of Trump. It was all a big hoax. I'm sorry to say, but it was just awful. They tried to impeach him for that. And then there was this Ukraine thing, and somebody needs to explain this. The Ukraine Biden bit and all that stuff. I don't really understand it, but they tried to get him for making a phone call to Ukraine or somebody like that. So he impeached the second time. All right, that didn't work. Guys, we got to get serious. Anybody got any better ideas? Somebody in this room, somebody figure out what are his vulnerabilities. I mean, this guy, he's fearless. It's like nothing we do is working. We've had 2 times up to bat, and both times we failed. Anybody got a foolproof plan? All right, somebody in the room says, all right, I think he does have a vulnerability. I think he does. I was at the Trump Hotel the other night, and he was eating dinner. And before he ate dinner, he pulled out a bottle of Purell. Yeah, and he washed his hands. Who does that? Germaphobes. Classic. It's also technically called Mysophobia. It's a classic disease of the well-to-do. They always think themselves cleaner than the rest of the rabble out there. So they develop germophobia. A lot of really wealthy people have this problem. They get scared of doorknobs and, this kind of. Howard Hughes was this way. Probably Zuckerberg's this way. They're all germaphobes. So, wow, okay, so that's a good vulnerability. That's a very interesting point. He's a germaphobe. Anybody got any other ideas? Yeah, sure. How about this? He hates China. He hates China. How about a virus from China that he and he alone has to eradicate? But you can't eradicate a virus. That's ridiculous. He'll never believe that. Oh, yeah? Xi Jinping did it. He believed he could do it. This is the way powerful men are. They believe they're capable of anything. Why don't we tell Trump there's a virus from China. He hates Chinese imports. He'll really hate a virus import because he hates germs. And we'll tell him that Xi Jinping got rid of it through totalitarian measures that very temporarily locked everybody in their homes and shut down their industries. And somebody else in the room says, you're telling me that this little plan you have is going to cause Trump to shut down the U.S. economy? You think that will work? let's give it a try. And that's exactly what happened. Or we could talk more about the way that whole thing unfolded. Incredible. The point is, at some point, and let's do talk about that, because I think this is really important history we have to go over and understand what happened between, say, January 30th and March 16th. Very interesting history. Well, it was only supposed to be for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, Fauci and the scarf lady came to him and said, Mr. President, we've made a lot of progress, but if you open up now, it's just going to get worse. Where the virus is going to spread through the country, everybody's going to blame you. You've got to eradicate this thing. We've got to get cases to zero. All right, 2 more weeks go by. How are cases? I'm sorry to say they're up, but they would have been way worse if you opened up the economy, if you allow people to open up. You say, yeah, good point. And so we're talking about late April now. The shutdowns began March 16th, thereabout. Yeah, March 12th, March 16th. By late April, Governor Kemp of Georgia says, you know what, this is stupid. I can't stand this. I can't do this to my people anymore. So he opened up Georgia. Trump was so enthralled with his plan that he denounced Kemp publicly and said, it's too soon. You can't open up. So Trump had really drank the Kool-Aid. The trick worked, in other words. It was great. It was a brilliant scheme to get rid of the president. Let's have him destroy the American economy at his own hands. Very interesting. And have Congress spend trillions and trillions of dollars to start a guaranteed income for all Americans. Amazing. None of this stuff could have ever happened outside of emergency times. It was a disaster. I don't need to tell you that. But it worked. But at some point, Trump started getting incredulous. It's like, I don't know. You know, in January or so, I had an intuition that this was a kind of a flu that comes and goes. Maybe I was right all along, and that Fauci is lying to me. And so he got ferocious, and he started demanding that the economy open up. Well, what happened? Nothing. Trump is screaming, liberate Michigan, liberate Louisiana. And he started really becoming a, open up the economy guy. We're talking about, and then of course the BLM riots happened, right? This is throughout the summer, when suddenly the CDC said, well, COVID's a problem, but also racism is an even bigger public health threat, So it's okay for people to gather, wear your mask, but it's okay for people to gather because we got to protest racism. So that was weird. And Trump began to think, maybe this whole thing is a racket. He was right. So he began to turn against Fauci and Birx, and also his son-in-law, Kushner, was heavily involved in this. I wonder how that relationship's looking there. And so he began to order the economy open up. Now, by now, the administrative state was 100% in a totalitarian sense in charge of the whole country. The CDC and Fauci were running everything. And, the deep state, the administrative state, I forgot to mention this, they have tentacles in every state, right? It's not just the federal government. They have tentacles everywhere. And they control it through highway funds, through, personal networks and all kinds of stuff. So federal government's everywhere, really. And so Trump is no longer in charge, and he gradually began to realize this because you had the fake government with Trump and the White House and the political staff and whatever, and they're giving press conferences and parading around like they're in charge. The actual rulers of the country were over the CDC and the NIH and every other federal agency that was running them, and they were completely ignoring Trump. And I know this for a fact because a friend of mine was working over at the NIH and had become very good friends with Trump and was whispering to Trump's ear, these people are scamming you. This virus is not what they say. First of all, you're not going to develop a vaccine against it because it's a coronavirus. We've never had one of those things. I don't know what the hell this mRNA technology is. But more than that, it's only the very old, the old and infirm who are in gravest danger. Yes, you get sick, but guess what? Sickness is part of life. There's nothing government can do to suppress this virus. You've been tricked, Mr. President. You've got to reverse all this. He's like, good point. I want you to go to work for the CDC. And he called up, who was the head of the CDC back in those days? Anyway, he called him, what? Redfield. He called up Redfield and said, hey, I got a guy, I want you to hire him. You've got a top position. All right, take care, but goodbye. I'm busy. So my friend shows up CDC, and they said, Matt, we don't have a job for you. So what do you mean you don't have a job for me? The president just said that it's like, yeah, I don't know what he's talking about. It's not going to work. So my friend calls up Trump and says, Mr. President, they tell me that they don't know anything about it. He's like, son of a bitch. So he calls up Redfield again. He said, look, I want this guy to have a job. I want it to be a top job and an important job and to have some influence over CDC policy. Now, make it happen. Hung up the phone. Guy goes back over there and said, look, it's just not going to work for us. So it went on like this. And after several weeks, the NIH told him to pack his bags and get the hell out. So he left. He left Washington. In other words, the deep state, like Trump really liked this guy and wanted to, you know who I'm talking about, Sharni? Yeah. I was just asking Sharni if she knew the person I was talking about. I don't know if I can say his name here, but so he had to pack his bags and go. So who's running the country? It wasn't Trump. He wasn't president between that day, I would say March 12th, and again, I would like to go back to that history and talk about this as soon as we fast forward here a little bit. And when he, I'm going to use quotation, air quotes, lost the election. So, and I'm not pushing any conspiracy theories here, but I'm telling you, if there was ever an election to steal, this would have been the one. Because, what? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, what happened to the Libertarian Party in 2020, huh? Stop following with that tone. Unbelievable. Disgraceful. I was attacked, by the way, by Reason magazine for putting down masks. I wrote that they're a sign of subversion and deference to authority and disgusting and contrary to science. They wrote a whole article attacking Reason magazine. Thanks a lot, Reason magazine. Anyway, tough year. All right, get this. This is where it gets really interesting. Are you interested? So it's a good story, right? All right. Oh, Jesus. It's also new, right? I think this is a new way to think about things. And I think it's really realistic. No, not yet. I'm not through. Also, they gave me 6 hours. No, Wait, this is the best thing. You've never heard this. And this is unbelievable. It's incredible. Incredible what doesn't make the headlines, but which really matters. October 2020, 2 weeks before the election, President Trump issues a new executive order. This executive order creates a new category of federal employees called Schedule F, short for Schedule Fuck You. Sorry about my language, kids. Although it's apparently a very common word these days. Schedule F employees were those employees of the federal civil service who have a hand in the making of policy, which, according to the executive order, would suggest that the federal government, that the president, the office of the presidency, the people we elect, should have some control over whether they can keep their jobs. And he ordered all 432 federal agencies to submit a report by January 21, 21, telling the president who among their staff would qualify for a reclassification. Wow. Okay. Between the release of that executive order and the next 30 days, only one agency actually complied. It was the Congressional Budget Office or something like that. I think it was the Congressional Budget Office. And do you know what their analysis came up with? According to the standard of this new Schedule F employee, 88% of our staff would have to be reclassified. 88%. Now, if that's representative of the whole federal government, we're talking about an executive order that would gut, fundamentally, the entire beast, utterly destroy the federal government as we know it. That's how powerful it was. Now, that was 2 weeks before the election. Very little news about this, but that news that there was, I think a few places, Politico ran an article about it. There's a piece in Real Clear Politics. They quoted experts in the federal government saying, this would be a calamity. It would cause a mass exodus from the federal workforce. Right? 2.5 million people would flee. That was brilliant. And I don't know who was the genius behind this thing, and I never had thought I would say these words, but God bless Trump. For that and that alone, unbelievable. Schedule F. Sorry, you've been reclassified. Oh, another word, Schedule F for fired. Wow. All right, 2 weeks later, some very strange things happened. We went to bed, Trump had won, we woke up, he had lost. Very interesting. Biden takes office. January 20th, repeals the executive order. Gone. Forever. Blasted away from memory. First Supreme Court pick, the judge who reversed his previous attempts to gut the administrative state. You see what's happening here? Isn't it remarkable? To me, this is the real story of what happened. And who are we talking about here? We're talking about the ATF, the IRS, the Federal Reserve, Department of Homeland Security. They think we're all terrorists, you know. The CDC, the NIH, the FTC, you name it, everything. Under something like Schedule F, they could all be fired by the new president. I tell you what, it's a conjectural history, but what would have happened if he had taken office would have fundamentally transformed this country. It would have been an incredible thing to see. It would have wiped, and also the Republicans had the votes in Congress in those days. Of course they didn't, they lost everything. I think this is why it didn't happen. This is an existential threat to the state itself. That's what Trump became. I never really understood it. I never understood the hysteria about the guy. After reading about Schedule F and what that would have done to this country, I now get it. It's the most important thing. They need totalitarian, dictatorial power over all of us forever. And a rule that says that we can fire 88% of the federal workforce would destroy Leviathan in America. And, my friends, I believe that that is what we need to do. All right. So, all right, look, the battle's not over. I hope not. This is it. This is it. I'm not sure how many people understand this. This is the great struggle we face. I think it's more important than anything else. It's an intractable problem. So let's just review here. The next people we elect in November, again, as always, are going to be very charming and interesting and on all the talk shows, and they're going to have their staffs, and they're going to parade around like they're in charge, and they're going to be utterly and completely irrelevant because they're not in charge of anything. Because the deep state, the permanent state, this is not a conspiracy theory, this is what we know, the fourth branch of government is the branch of government. However, if that Chevron deference case is upheld in Florida, and the new president, somebody like DeSantis, I don't know, passes Schedule F, everything could genuinely fall apart. But we have to have a public consciousness about what's happening. And I don't think people entirely understand in this country. Because you know what? Too many people believe the media, right? When you turn on the TV and they're like, oh, Secretary of the Interior is involved in a scandal, the very first thing you should say is, oh, well, he's probably trying to make some change. That's how it works in this country, right? Or in the case of this Judge Brown, or whatever her name is, who's going to be our new Supreme Court justice, you know, I should have asked myself, why did they pick her? You know, what did she do to support the administrative state that earned her that spot? She was being rewarded for something. She saved Leviathan from Trump's first round of attempts in 2018 to gut it. This is the great struggle. We need I'm not a very political person, but we need people on the stump to explain this to voters so they can see what's happening. If the Republicans take over in November and they're serious about making real change, and that's by no means a given, but if they want to, you can forget all the rest of the blather and baloney out there. Taking on the administrative state, the deep state, really the continuing to drain the swamp is the only thing that they need to be thinking about. It's the most important thing. And that comes down to reform of the civil service. Fire Fauci is a great slogan, and that's a good beginning, but there's 2.9 other million people who need to be fired also. Right now, they can't be. We got to put the elected leaders and us, through them, in charge of this country again. We are not. We've got to change that system. It's urgent. Now, I talked to my friend Steve Bannon about this. Can you believe I just said those words? I mean, it's only like 4 years ago I wrote a big article attacking him as a dark knight of fascism. No, he probably is. But I really like him now. He's a really nice guy, and he really hates the administrative state, so I'm always going on his show all the time. And he said to me, I said, look, this is an intractable problem. This is a serious issue. I don't think most libertarians are even aware of it. They don't even, most people, Republicans, nobody understands. People don't understand what we're dealing with in this country. We've been invaded by this cancer that's grown over a century. Our real rulers, we don't have any control over them. They got to be destroyed and busted up, or we don't have a future as a country. And Steve Bannon said to me, very interesting Hegelian kind of thing, as he always says. He said, what man has made, man can unmake. All right. I'll go with that. So yeah, it can happen. It can happen. But it won't happen unless we understand and we know what we face. It's not a battle. It's a war for freedom. If we don't win it, we're sunk. Our children, their children, this country's lost. They showed us what they can do to us. It's not enough to say that can't ever happen again, all right? We don't need better rulers. We need to change the system fundamentally so it cannot happen. Nothing like that can ever happen again. All right, that's my new book. I'm going to stop there, open up for questions. Thank you.
Are you familiar with the sort of the argument about legal challenge strategies? I was personally emboldened by Charles Murray's clarion call. You know, flood them with lawsuits, and then hopefully a guy. Let me finish. A guy you're also hopefully familiar with, Philip Hamburger, who a lawyer who wrote about it, who said Charles is a little naive, but strategic legal assaults, and I don't even know what Mr. Hamburger's doing in that regard, but it seemed hopeful. So could you comment on that
No, I will.
strategy?
And Hamburger's book, which I haven't read, but I think it's one of the only books on the topic, actually. Very, very important book from what I've seen of it. But this is the thing we need to remember. Yes, legal challenges need to be there, but they're expensive. Like, most people don't have, and you have to find the attorneys, right? You gotta have the attorneys, you gotta pay the bills, and you gotta have the patience. Now, a lot of people in this country are good at this, and it's great. But let's don't forget that it's not just our side that's flooding the thing with lawsuits. They are doing the same thing too, and you only need to look at what happened after the May 2018 executive orders from the Office of the President. 3 of them trying to curb the power of the administrative state. There were dozens of lawsuits immediately filed by federal workers and their unions to stop this. So it's a battle of lawsuits, and it's both directions. And here's the problem. We are wildly underfunded. They are very well funded, you know? On the other hand, we do have the truth on our side, and we do have the people mostly with us. And you can do a lot with the truth and public support. As Louis Eastman and I can tell you for the Brownstone Institute, we have a tiny little institute that we started last year. And right now, our web traffic is crushing every DC think tank that you can name, you know? And how are we funded? We say, hey, you like what we do? Give us money. And then they, by the way, I got a phone call the other day from one of these fact-check organizations demanded to know how we're funded. I said, well, you know, by people who like what we do. Well, you're going to be transparent about that? Well, I just was. People like what we do, and they give us money. Are you going to give us their names? No, I'm not going to violate their privacy rights. Shut the hell up. Anyway, the point is, a few passionate people working with focus and good technology can change this country. I mean, Brownstone Institute, we're getting like 1 million page views. That doesn't include translations and reprints all over the world. It's probably, by my own estimate, is 10 million a month. I don't know. Did I say a day? I meant a month. 10 million a month, just to be clear. So you know, just by saying what's true and having good facts to back up and representing good ideals, you can make a huge difference. And if you gave me all the weaponry in the whole world in one box and a good idea in the other, I would take the box with the good idea in it, because that's more powerful in the end. Okay. Go ahead.
I guess I was wondering about the deep state and how it might encompass the whole world, all the major countries right now. And that being said, the WEF was trying to pass that they had the power, right, WHO had the power to decide, regardless of our countries, you know, what was a virus, what was a pandemic, and what, you know, who we could wear masks. They could tell us anything. Obviously, the African countries, really, India, I think, they really said no, but there's still a big question about whether that's going to pass, because that's not going to, then it doesn't matter what our country does.
Well, you know, what's interesting about that point is that the World Health Organization obviously has no direct power over the U.S., you know? And people say, so it doesn't matter that they have a treaty. But actually it does matter, because what happens, as we've learned, have we learned nothing over the last 2.5 years? Jesus. So what happens is the World Health Organization says, all right, monkeypox is here, it's a pandemic, and so therefore you got to wear a mask, or whatever, and socially distance or something like that. So if you are going against what the World Health Organization says, suddenly you're on the hot seat, right? The media comes after you. How can you defy the World Health Organization? Are you against science? You know, so this is the way it works. And we also know that social media companies defer to the World Health Organization and the CDC. I mean, you know, they've given up their platforms. They're big tech. I don't know if you know it. I would call it like the 5th branch of government at this point. You know, it's really rotten and corrupt. So this is why we don't want a treaty from the World Health Organization, because it just gives them credibility and allows people like the CDC to go, well, we're just deferring to the World Health Organization, you know. So just because they don't have enforcement power doesn't mean they don't have real influential power. And that treaty to which you refer is deeply, deeply dangerous. It would codify lockdowns as the part of pandemic response forever, which is another way of saying lockdowns forever, because you know what? Pathogens are all around us, and they always will be. We live and coexist with them for a long time. We still invented the idea of freedom rights despite them. So, you know, World Health Organization saying you have to lock down for the presence of a pathogen. What is that? Yeah. We know what that means. It means the end of freedom forever. Go ahead.
Hi. Some people who have the right instincts about the dangers of an entrenched state have pushed for a measure called term limits. I have even seen signs for term limits.
Yeah.
From my understanding, this refers to term limits only for elected officials.
Yeah, yeah.
My question to you is, would term limits skew the administrative state versus the elected officials even more in the wrong direction?
Yes.
Okay. That's my
No,
question.
you heard his question, right? So the question of term limits, right? So it's like, these guys have too much power. They hang around too long in Washington, so limit them to 1 or 2 terms, or 3 terms, or 4 terms, or whatever. Yeah, that would only give the administrative state even more power. That term limits, you know, it's a nice slogan. It would actually, on net, probably do damage. It certainly wouldn't achieve anything. I mean, I never thought I would say this, but in a funny way, it's really true that in the balance of power in the federal government, we need our elected politicians to have more power. It's a strange, but what I mean is not more power over us, but more power over the administrative state, right? So that at least we get back to a representative democracy at some point, and the Constitution. That would be the major step in the right direction. Right now, as I said, these guys are just mostly circus performers. They're just clowns. They don't know it. And everybody defers to them. Hello, Mr. Senator. You know, and they get invited to all the fancy parties and, you know, so on. So, but they don't have any real power. They learn this over time, but they never tell you. Have you ever heard a politician say, well, you know, I became senator, and I was really excited about being senator, but gosh, I realized after a while, the Senate doesn't matter. I'm just utterly useless up there. But send me back anyway. I mean, they don't usually say that because they can't tell the truth, but they learn it over time. They also have, there's a deep state in the legislative affairs too. I asked my friend Thomas Massey, you know this guy? Yeah. Amazing guy. So 1 week after the lockdowns happened, March 16th, a week later, there's a bill as big as this building that's spending $2 trillion to solve the virus. I don't know what the hell. And I asked him, I said, hey, and he thought it was outrageous because he said that that's what prolonged the lockdown. So if you're paying people to lock down, they're going to continue to lock down, right? Subsidize something, you get more of it. If they hadn't passed that bill, we would have ended the lockdowns very quickly. By the way, I want to go back to your World Health Organization thing if I can at some point, because it's actually really important. But I asked him, I said, wait, who wrote that bill? He goes, you know, it's like everything around here. Nobody knows. It just shows up in your email, you know? You click on it, and it's like 15,000 pages. You know, so nobody knows. They have their own deep state. Go ahead.
I want to ask how it is manifested on state level and what we can do on state level, like short of electing DeSantis, and also like here in New Hampshire, our Commissioner for Education, Frank Edelblue, who spoke on this stage once, like he also hated, similar to Betsy DeVos, but he had some minor successes here. So how is it on state level?
No, I think obviously the federalist system, I mean, if we don't have a greater appreciation of the federalist system now, I mean, we haven't been paying attention. It's been glorious that Florida opened up, that Georgia opened up, that New Hampshire can go its own way, and so on. I mean, short of secession, the idea of deferring to the states is a great system. They're trying to end that, by the way. You know, they're trying to create a public health agency, another administrative state, to make federalism and virus response impossible. But for now, activity at the state level is something we can actually do. I mean, I really have a lot of respect for what's going on in New Hampshire because you really do have sort of slow but deliberate efforts to have a real major legislatively inspired influence over the affairs of government in the state. And it is gradually making a difference. And after November, it could make a huge difference. I mean, in the end, you have to kill the beast, right? You have to kill the federal bureaucracy. But until that time, working at the state level is glorious. And my friends who have moved from Florida describe, you know, that it feels like freedom and they're not used to it. You know, they love it. Go ahead.
I found it interesting that you called Steve Bannon a friend, considering at the beginning of the Trump administration, you were very anti-Trump, and you've always made an effort to disassociate from people who are called fascists or white supremacists and things like that.
That's right.
So how much do you think the national hysteria over white supremacy or fascism is a deep state response to the threat of Trump dismantling it? And is white supremacy something that libertarians should even be concerned about?
Yeah, it's very, so I wrote a whole book on this topic, right? It's called Right-Wing Collectivism. And I wrote it from an intellectual point of view. I despise, so the history of actual racism, and I don't mean jokes and biases and prejudices, I mean like ideological racism, is intertwined with the history of statism. And fascism is a real thing. It's all real. There are very many varieties of totalitarianism, some of which come from the right. And we learned that during the 20th century. So I wrote a whole book about that topic. In terms of evaluating the real and present dangers to America, I don't, for now, see that as a really important issue at all, actually. I don't. I mean, I don't like any form of collectivist ideology at all. But your interesting speculation that maybe the public frenzy surrounding these issues was, in fact, part of a deep state plot, I mean, I can't rule that out. I mean, it's possible. And so, none of which takes away from the real and present dangers of fascism in all times and places. I'm just telling you that right now, we have, the beast has shown itself to us. And it's not those pathetic fools marching around in Charlottesville, right? Those idiots. I mean, I think they're just punks. The problem is the 3 million permanent bureaucrats in this country that are ruling us. They're our real dictators. And they're very respectable. They don't carry tiki torches, right? They wear badges. They're the enemy. Go ahead.
2 questions. With that Florida case, will it reach the Supreme Court? And when do you think it will? And the second thing is, would Trump win again, and might he meet an unfortunate fate like JFK?
Yeah, both these questions are interesting. I mean, certainly, I think the Florida case is going to land in the Supreme Court. And I think land in the sense that they will have to decide to hear it or not. If they decide not to hear it, then I think it first goes to the Sixth Circuit, but they're going to defer to the Fifth, and then the CDC is going to push it though, because they cannot have this decision stand. They can't. I mean, they still want us to mask up, but it's not just about masks on airplanes. Those are a mere symbol. They represent the power of the state, the infinite totalitarian omnipotence of the state over your life in every respect, your home, your church, your children, all right? So it's not just that you put that mask on, that's what you're approving of. You understand that the mask is not just a thing it's not just a piece of clothing. It's a symbol of servitude, as it always has been in history, by the way, always has been. Yeah. So, yeah, wouldn't you know, it all come down to the mask. Thank you, Reason Magazine. Yeah, anyway, it all comes down to the mask. So if Chevron goes, that's a very big step in the direction. Now, the other question is, if we get a president who continues the work of Trump, you remember what I said, 2 weeks before the election, passed an executive order creating a new classification of federal employees. Schedule F, where you can be fired. That is an existential threat to the federal government. I'm sorry, my friends. There are a lot of people in this country for whom the choice between freedom and servitude is not just a multiple choice question on a test. It's everything to them. The state, in their view, must survive regardless. Anything is possible and necessary from their point of view to preserve it. We're headed for some interesting times.
Could you clarify? Could you clarify when you mentioned that, let's say, for example, 88% of the workforce could be fired under the Schedule F? You kind of implied that they'd be fired and that'd be it. I assume they would just be replaced by the appointees of the president in power. What do you think?
Well, and I think that would be an improvement, right? The spoils system has a lot to say for it, I think. Not just I think. It's spoils system is better than what we have right now, which is dictatorship. Okay, but this is a very good question. So what needs to happen after the Schedule F employees are all fired? We need to cut the damn budgets, all right? There's no getting around it. We got to cut the budget. And we're not talking about cuts in the rate of increase. We need to cut the actual budget. We need to defund the CDC and not create a new agency on top of it. We need to defund the ATF, defund Department of Transportation and Labor and all the rest of this crap. And don't tell me we need them for issuing passports. We can have private parties do that. Don't tell me that we have to have them to collect labor statistics. We've got better labor statistics from the private sector. We don't need these people for anything. Honestly, we don't. Just screw them. I mean, if you want to get really radical, we could actually abolish a lot of these agencies. How about 432 of them? All right, go ahead.
So besides just the, 2.9 million?
Yeah.
In the agencies, what about all of the people in so you have the Department of Education, and then say you get rid of that, and then what about all of the public school teachers that are employees at the state level, and then how many millions of people are basically under those agencies but not directly a part of them that are going to try to potentially fight this because their livelihoods are tied to it and all that?
Well, I'll answer your question. My 2.9 figure is really the administrative apparatus. It does not include postal employees. It doesn't include military. And I don't know. I think we could get rid of the post office. But that's another. I mean, your postman is not your problem. He's slow and inefficient, but mostly a nice guy. So I'm focusing mostly on the actual, and keep in mind that God bless. I keep saying this. God bless Trump, but his executive. I can't believe it. The executive order reclassifying people as Schedule F. Remember that he had a standard. If you're involved in policy making, then you have to be reclassified. So there's going to be a lot. If that goes through again, there's going to be a big struggle over who qualifies as policy making, and we don't know entirely because, as I said, only one agency actually came through with his demand of 432 to cough up the information. Only one came through and said 88% qualified, which is terrifying. Go ahead.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Josh Yoder, the president of U.S. Freedom Flyers. We're the pilots who stood up against the mandates at the airlines. And
what
we're
name?
doing, Josh Yoder. So what we're doing, what I'm trying to figure out, I completely agree with you on the administrative state. It's a huge problem. But the other problem that we have is these companies are doing the totalitarian bidding of the government and these people in the administrative state. And we're bringing litigation against both the companies.
Yeah.
The
You're
FAA,
talking about Pfizer and not Moderna?
Well, against the United States of America. We're going to get to Pfizer and Moderna, but also against the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and the airlines.
Yeah.
Is there something more effective that we could be doing
No.
outside of litigation, or should we really focus on
I think
litigation?
it's our only
How
option.
Are we gonna break
I mean, public support, and by the way, this is one of the reasons the Brownstone exists. We run articles by all groups like this that are fighting these mandates. We try to bring them public attention. We drive a ton of traffic to their sites, and then they get donations so they can fund their lawsuits. This is part of what we do. Is just to generate public support for what we're doing. I think you're approaching this the right way. So thank you for what you're doing too.
No, I would love to have that discussion off the record, because we are struggling with that. I mean, obviously we're talking about millions of dollars for these cases.
Oh, of course, it's a disaster.
And we need to collaborate with
right.
these other
We're
other
fighting
organizations.
a very well-funded Leviathan state on a shoestring budget, and everybody here. I mean, you know, groceries are up, rent's up. You're all feeling poor all the time. But look, spare some extra money for organizations like this. And it really helps. I can just tell you, when I go on Bannon, we'll get 100 contributions of $5. I write absolutely everybody back. Okay, $5. I mean, that's giving to a cause that it shows that you're an idealist. It shows you care and you want to do something for the country. And we should all be, these are emergency times. We need to give of ourselves a little bit. We waste a lot of money on silly things, Stop buying retail, buy from the thrift store, and give some money to great organizations that are fighting this crap. It really helps.
Today there was statistics that said that the American people have the least faith ever in the Supreme Court. That obviously follows on with the media, the politicians. We have a real dearth of belief in institutions in this country. I view that as a positive. I'm curious if you have any opinion as to how we should play that when it comes to the cultural divide. Should we allow them to fight each other until they give up and dissolve, or what's the avenue?
I worry, sometimes I look up, the anarchist in me is always celebrating this poll showing that nobody trusts anything or anybody, okay? I'm like, yeah, damn right. But also I know from history that that usually doesn't end well. So it's a problem. And my friends in this room, all of you, we stand on a precipice, right? I mean, this interesting times, as Mao said. We could go this way or that way. Like right now, we're on the verge. Most situations like this end up worse because of the chaos and distrust and anger, dislocation, not to mention psychopathology has been unleashed in the population, demoralization, sadness, immorality, it's all around us, criminality, these are very, very bad times. How do you take such bad times and turn them into hopeful times for the cause of human liberty? I'm not sure, but I do know, as Steve Bannon said, what man has made, man can unmake. And we also know there are other periods in history where liberty has dawned. The American Revolution was a good case in point. And we've seen other cases. Prohibition went away. I'm very proud of this federal judge in Florida. There are things that can work. But it's going to be up to us. The only way we turn the present chaos into a real, genuine, lasting fight for freedom is through the war of ideas. Getting out there, writing articles, convincing your friends, forming groups like this one, going to conferences, becoming, it's hard to say an activist, but a creative one who's pushing the idea of freedom itself. This is it, my friends. We're born for this moment. It can go this way, it can go that way. We got to make sure it goes the right way. All right, thank you so much. They're giving me the hook.
Give it up for Jeffrey Tucker.